Did you find procurement, or did procurement find you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I fell into procurement more than anything else. I was studying engineering, got a chance to work on some manufacturing in Scotland with a very small company, and they asked me at the end of my school, do you really want to come and work in here and work on the line?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, honestly, not really. And they offered me the opportunity to be a buyer, and from there it's just blossomed.
So we were talking off mic. You're based in the Tampa area. I'm here in Orlando. Neither of us really have Floridian accents. So how did you find yourself here in Florida?
Yeah, so I worked for one of Jabil's competitors for around 10 years, also out of Scotland, and joined Jabil in 2004. And I had the opportunity to move to Florida in 2007. And to be fair, it would be remiss of me to say that when I joined Jabil, I didn't have that at the back of my head. I'd love the opportunity to go and live in Florida. Scottish guy. The west coast of Scotland is like the kind of northwest of the US. It's wet, it's cold, it's kind of damp, and having the opportunity to be near the beach, near Disney, everything that's way more appealing to a Scottish guy. That was definitely a factor. And so I moved here 2007, and had 5 years in Singapore between 2011 and 2016, which was a fantastic experience. Really loved my time there, and been back here since 2016. Florida is a place I'd probably call home now. It feels like this is where I'm meant to be.
Yeah, no, I can empathize. I'm Northern English, and so basically the same weather that you experience.
Yeah.
Once you start getting sunshine and 90 degrees every day, and it's hard to give that up. And I bet in Singapore's such a surreal place, at least for me, is it feels like you kind of in London, but you walk out the building and you're sweating buckets because of the humidity everywhere you go. But then over there, people are playing cricket and rugby.
Yeah.
So I always felt it a really surreal place.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. It's it has obviously got that massive British influence to it as well. Where street names you're looking, going Graham Street. That's pretty interesting. And there's the architecture as well for a lot of the older buildings. You can definitely see the British influence in it. So yeah, Singapore was it was really, really interesting. And as you say, being on the equator, it was the same temperature every day. You knew what you were going to get. It was going to be 90 Fahrenheit, and there was a chance of rain, and they blew through pretty quickly. It wasn't like Scottish rain where it's just there all day. But yeah, no, definitely a great place to live, and gives you so much access to the rest of Asia, in particular Southeast Asia, and from a professional perspective, allowed me to go and visit so many suppliers out in the Asian region. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed my time there.
And your area of specialization really is in electronics and electronic components, isn't it? So perfect kind of jumping off space for that.
Yeah, exactly. So we obviously have a significant amount of supplier presence in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and also getting into the manufacturing hubs in China. So it was just such a good time to be there. It helped, getting around the facilities, understanding a little bit more about the manufacturing processes that suppliers, are managing as they look to manufacture those components for us. So yeah, learned so much in that time there. And obviously the other side of that is just, the Asian culture, and, every country having its own culture. You just learn so much from sitting with people, and, it can be frustrating at times because you're obviously used to British or American or Western type culture, and it's very different. But you learn a lot, but also I think you have to be patient, and you have to truly sit and understand the things that are really important to those folks in those regions and the culture that they have, etc. So yeah, it was a fantastic time. Really enjoyed it.
I mean, I find, because we were talking offline about, I spent a lot of time in Asia as well, and I think it really helps you kind of have that the different perspectives of how to work across different cultures, and what works and what doesn't work. And you can't necessarily come in with kind of the techniques and the tactics that you might use in one region when you're working with another region. And that's not something to get frustrated about. It's something to just kind of change your approach around.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be agile, and ensure that you can pivot where you need to pivot. And it helped having a team over there as well. They quickly reminded me that not everything's done the same way as it is in the UK or the US. So it was a really good learning experience, and I'd go back in a heartbeat if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Now I want to talk today about the semiconductor market and some of the changes in the market. I think there's so many different pressures, kind of headwinds and tailwinds, both on semiconductors at the moment. We wanted to deep dive a little bit into it. And so I just wonder if you could share, kind of to kick things off, how do you see the current state of semiconductor sourcing?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've obviously came through some really turbulent times. If we go back to just kind of post, or I guess during COVID, but as we start to come out of that, the demand for semiconductors was just at a peak, and supply was obviously significantly less than the demand at the time, and we ended up in a bit of a bubble. I think a lot of the manufacturers changed the way of operating, the way of placing orders. There was more contracts put in place or programs put in place that were there to basically try and give everybody a kind of share of parts, and just not allow the kind of major OEMs to come in and take everything and take all the capacity, which I think was admirable. It was the right thing to do. Perhaps though the terms were a little too strict, and I think now we're in this situation where you've got the fallout from some of those contracts where there's still a ton of inventory that's sitting around the industry, whether that's with an OEM, with an EMS partner, with a distributor, or with the manufacturer themselves, of parts that probably aren't required anymore. The shift, the semiconductor market evolves pretty quickly. Products are evolving quicker as well when we look at the end products that consumers are buying. And so, I think there's inventory lying out there that's probably inflating the overall look of, the status of inventory, and it's just not the right parts. And so therefore, when you look at the balance of the components that are required, book-to-bill ratios are pretty high at the moment. Capacity utilization is low. Lead times are short. And so it's not going to take much to push the entire market back into a shortage situation like we saw back in 2021, 2022. So it's a kind of precarious position at the moment. If there's a little demand spike, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't know that any companies necessarily changed their approach significantly since 21 and 22, because you came through that pretty quickly. And then 23, 24, you've seen this reduction in demand. Parts were becoming more available. And, people forget that, the issues that they faced the year before. And, now it's all about, driving cost out. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens if human nature kicks in again, and, there's a little bit of a spike in lead times, or some shortages, whatever it may be. Does human behavior kick in, and then we're in this situation again where people are placing more orders than perhaps they need, and it's just escalating.
It's kind of volatile. It seems like it's it's from one extreme to another. There's not much that may cause the panic, probably based on PTSD of what happened a couple of years, probably 4 years ago, to go into preservation mode.
Yep. And again, it's human nature, right? We're going to do things in procurement roles that ensure that we can build products for either ourselves or for our customers, and it's just all about self-preservation at that point. And you're going to do what you have to do to make sure you get those parts. And like I say, I don't know that anybody's necessarily doing anything different to what was happening back then. I think a lot of companies are understanding that we have we have to be closer to the manufacturers. these components, and truly start sharing and being a little bit more transparent with the products that we're building, helping them understand roadmaps, and obviously suppliers are doing the same. And it's I think from that side of things, communication has probably improved, and that will help for sure. But the push comes to the shove, and we face another shortage market. I'm pretty sure things will just kind of return to the way they were.
Do you see that? We're obviously in this AI age, and so much investment, so much capital investment in building infrastructure to support all of these new AI models and the tools that are coming off it. Is that impacting supply and demand in any way for semiconductors?
Yeah, it's probably the one sector that's mentioned more by our supply base now than any other.
Yeah.
I would say for the past 3-4 years, there's been a lot of focus in automotive, and probably in the last 18-24 months more on the EV side of things, but definitely seen that evolve more to an AI data center, the infrastructure to support that conversation with suppliers. It's definitely having an effect on supply and demand, both on the demand side and supply side. I think if you look at what's happening in the memory market, we're seeing some of the tier one manufacturers now basically end the life product that was the shining light of maybe 5-6 years ago. So very quick to end the life that product and really focus on the memory products that are required by the hyperscalers. Similarly, on the high-end chip side of things, you look at your TSMCs and the technology that they're building. It's really driving the demand for the entire market. And if you look at the overall semiconductor market and you look at the growth of the last year, it's been driven by AI for sure.
And is that likely to take capacity out of other, as that capability is built to meet that demand? Is that net new investment in manufacturing facilities, for example, or is it just going to where you said you've got pretty low line utilization in other areas?
Yeah.
Is there a risk that capacity will be taken out of the market for good to be replaced by the capacity to build to support the AI infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it's all new capacity that's required to support the AI infrastructure. The technology requirements are very different. So I see that as net new. The problem is though that if the rest of the market doesn't pick up, then there is going to be a lack of investment in more of the legacy products that are required also to support the AI infrastructure.
Right.
It's the high-end chips for sure. Everybody kind of focuses in on that, but power and analog and some of the discrete components, we need to see continued investment in those technologies as well to ensure that you can build a product. You can't just build a product with a microcontroller or a microprocessor and a graphics card, etc. It doesn't work that way. You need the entire spectrum of components. So unless there is continued investment in some of those more legacy or mature nodes, then we're going to have an issue. So it's become pretty bifurcated, to be honest. When you look at the high end side of things and then the more commodity items, the commodity items are where we're seeing that low utilization.
Right. Are you seeing impact based on all the geopolitics at the moment? And I put that in two categories. One is obviously tariffs, which are a little bit of a moving target, but secondarily, just the broader kind of structural deglobalization. Moving away from focus on China, whether that's moving into other locations within Asia versus completely investing and building in new supply chains in other countries. Is that impacting your market?
It's definitely a factor. If we start on tariffs, there's been so many conversations on tariffs within these four walls, but I'm sure every company's headquarters are dealing with the impact of tariffs. I think we're pretty fortunate in the fact that we're pretty balanced from a global manufacturing footprint perspective. We have facilities in China, facilities in Southeast Asia, facilities in Europe, facilities in the US, and kind of Latin America. So, pretty evenly split across the 3 regions. So, we can pivot where our customers need us to pivot from a manufacturing perspective. But on the supply side, it's definitely something that I believe suppliers are starting to understand, that they need to be more transparent with their customers. Broadly speaking, I would say that semiconductor suppliers in particular, over the last few years have been very slow in providing country of origin information, really truly helping us understand the nodes in their network, their manufacturing network, because they see that
the tiers of suppliers within the supply chain.
They see that as their IP, which I totally understand, but now we need to know. And, there was, over the course of the last few weeks, there's been some flip-flopping between, are we going to use the country of diffusion or the country of origin, which could be the assembly test site. So still need to see how that shapes out over the course of the next few months and quarters. But there's been definitely more transparency from the suppliers to help us understand that. So for sure, tariffs is impacting it. I think people are starting to source with tariffs in mind.
Yeah.
But with the volatility of the situation around tariffs, I'm not sure that any company's making significant investment decisions until things settle out.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a factor, Philip. It's definitely something that we're talking to suppliers about. And then on the kind of more geopolitical side of things, it's kind of non-tariff related. For sure, companies are looking at different strategies there. Is it China plus one strategy?
Yeah.
If you're a Chinese OEM, it's China for China. I've even heard some companies approaches to talk about a non-China, non-Taiwan supply chain.
Just completely get out of the region.
Correct. Yeah. So there's a lot of conversations around it. Again, I don't necessarily think too many decisions are being made broadly, to move and shift supply chains, but certainly it's conversations that are taking place. And, there's definitely a shift. If I look at the component manufacturers out of China and into Southeast Asia, or maybe even back to, the country of their headquarters, be that Taiwan, Japan, or Korea. So there's definitely a shift, but, I think from a manufacturing footprint, as I think of end products into the market, probably a little stagnant at the moment.
Yeah. It's to your point about not making investments while things are so volatile. It feels like, things there will have to be. We're kind of waiting just to see where everything shakes out. And, just politically here in the US, that will have to be done within the next 12 months, which still seems like a long time. But actually, it's not a long time in terms of making huge, big investment decisions. And so and I say 12 months because then you're going into the midterm cycle for the elections, and you feel like this is an issue that needs to have some, there needs to be some clarity by midterms. Are you seeing different, from a sourcing strategy perspective, starting to look at different strategies? So, for example, looking at multi-source or multi-region versus single, and you're starting to think differently about kind of where you're sourcing from, or at least how you're mitigating risk based on the suppliers that are being selected today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's something that we push our customers on frequently. Having the optionality within a bill of materials, within the AVL for those parts. It's, you think of tariffs, geopolitical issues, but also just thinking back to the shortage situation of 2-3 years ago. Without optionality, you're really reliant on that one supplier, and it's just not a prudent way to go. We really need to be way more agile, have the ability to have multi-source components. And I would say in the vast majority of the bill of materials, it really shouldn't be an issue. I get that, some of the components that are used in, maybe the actual brains of the product, you're probably going to have to be single source there. But you can also be smart then about talking to the supplier around, well, I need more than one location. You think about it from a geopolitical standpoint, but also just event risk. What if there's an earthquake? What if there's a volcano? What if there's whatever? Being a little bit more demanding of the supply base to ensure that they have multi-source optionality within their own facilities, then I think becomes very important. And I think certainly over the last 12 months, I've seen a lot of semiconductor suppliers talk specifically around that. We have dual source fabs, we have dual source assembly test. If you want to be specific about which assembly line you want your parts to come off of and which fab you want them to come off of, we can do that. It's going to be a premium because you're then helping to determine the load in my facility, but I'm going to charge you for it. So there's definitely optionality there, both in applying new suppliers or additional suppliers to an AVL, or just pushing your supplier to ensure that they themselves have more than one facility to manufacture that product.
Do you find there's a willingness to invest in optionality? Because you say it can be more expensive, whether that's developing a secondary source where they're kind of on. You may give them 5% of the volume or 10% of the volume or something, but so that they have the ability to ramp if you need to. But there's a cost of doing that. Whereas we historically, with our cost blinkers on, would just go to let's put it all in one place, and that's going to be the lowest cost for us. And it's hard to go back and say, well, it's all well and good mitigating some risk in this way, but there's a premium to do that.
This is where I think people do remember 21 and 22, because when you're paying 50x the cost of a 20-cent part to build a product, then I think there's definitely more of an understanding of the impact that it can cause by not having that multi-source strategy. So I think from an OEM perspective, it's definitely happening, and it has been happening since that time. I think from the supplier standpoint, I think more and more companies are asking for it. So there's then an understanding that they need to provide us with that optionality. So it's definitely a cost, to your point, Philip. But the alternative is, what I mentioned, in paying a 20x, 50x premium on parts that, are available from, some source that you don't really know, and you're hopeful that, you're going to get what you ask for. And it's going to work.
It was interesting what you said a little bit earlier about kind of the relationship side. And before I want to kind of pivot to relationships, but before that, we talked about a lot of the suppliers in the market see their supply chains as being their IP. And that was certainly something I always came up against when I was in direct material sourcing and automotive sourcing. And yet you're trying to uncover what's that single supplier of risk that is at the third or fourth tier that you have no kind of visibility into. Do you feel that because the transparency is starting to open up a little bit, that I've always found this as being like the one thing we haven't solved for in trying to understand how, all the different connections with our supply chain. Do you think that's a solvable problem? Or we're always going to have this backwards and forwards? Because technology providers will say, well, we can solve it by this, that, and the other. But I've just always struggled to do that. And therefore, you can't really scenario plan, or you can't do deep scenario plans based on what ifs, because you don't know how, what lurks beneath in your supply chain.
Yeah, I think it's solvable. I think ultimately it will be, yes. I don't think it's solvable today, though. I think as time evolves, transparency is going to continue to improve. I think we'll have more access to the nodes below, maybe tier 1 and tier 2. I think we can get below that. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take a bit of investment, both in time and cash. We're going to have the technology to really help support that. But it's going to be hard. It's not something that's going to be done overnight. I think if I look at where we're at today versus where we were 2 years ago, things have improved significantly. Even simple things like country of origin, I don't think anybody has their arms around that fully. I'm fortunate enough to get to sit in front of a few of my peers, both in the OEM side, outside of our industry, and even within the EMS space. And it's definitely an area where nobody really has a true solution. Certainly in the technology side, I think there's technology that can help manage it, but you still need the data to get to that,
Right.
answer of here's where the risk is going to lie. And, if you think about what's going on in China with rare earth elements as well, we're not down at that level. We're having to ask suppliers, do you use those rare earth elements within your manufacturing processes or within your component? And so therefore it's not readily available. It's an ask and you may get it.
Yeah.
And then you're relying on the supplier to give you an honest assessment of where they're at. So until such time that we can click a button, we can see all the data, we can follow the nodes, we can understand every raw material and every raw material supplier that's used to manufacture that product, then we're going to really struggle around risk management at that level. I think in part number level, I think everybody's got a decent handle on that. Within the four walls of Jabil, certainly we have enough data that enables us to determine where we think risk truly lies, and how we can take mitigating actions on it. But you go down into the tiers of the supply base below the component level, then it starts to become a bit of a struggle.
Right. And so if it's relationship based, which has certainly been my experience of, how much trust is there in a relationship to share that kind of information.
Yeah.
You kind of have this unique position of being on, both a manufacturer, a buyer and a seller. So on both sides of kind of the relationship with different parties, obviously, what does it take to be a good customer, to be the customer of choice, so that you're able to build those relationships that are built on the trust, which enables you to get the insights that you might not otherwise get if it was a more combative relationship?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of look at it a couple of ways. We've invested heavily in people.
Mm-hmm.
So we have global commodity managers who are, either coming out of the industry. So they're coming from component manufacturers. They understand, the intricacies of the manufacturing lines, how difficult it can be to build some of the products. So there's an understanding there. It's not just a part number and, hey, I need this part. It's an understanding of how difficult it is to build some of these components that we're buying. So that helps for sure. And certainly on the people side, within Jabil, we established a supplier relationship management team, which has really helped Jabil through the last 7-8 years. And it's a little different. I think initially some of the suppliers were looking at it thinking, okay, you're investing in a supplier relationship team. What's this all about? And at the time, it was a buyer's market, which it wasn't like we actually needed something at this point. We were looking at it going, we have a great commodity management team, but they're focused on the next 90 to 365 days. We're not getting beyond that 365-day window to talk about kind of longer term plans with suppliers. So we invested in supplier relationship management to ensure that we can talk to suppliers at an executive level about their longer term plans and think about technology roadmaps, how are their executive teams incentivized, what is it that their board are looking from them to deliver, and really dive into the supplier ecosystem and truly understand how we can be a better partner to them. And we created this process. It's called co-developed account plans, and basically we asked the suppliers, what do you need from Jabil? What do you need from Jabil over the next 3-5 years? What can we do that's going to help you with the goals for the company, the strategy of the company? And then we would have some asks as well. We would sit down together and say, okay, right, 5 of your 10 asks are crazy. There's just no way we can do that. But these other 5 make a ton of sense. I think we can truly influence these positively and help drive the relationship forward. And, there'll be a similar conversation on the supplier side to Jabil. Some of your asks we just can't do, but we can do some of the others. And basically we'd sign off on it and we'd review it every year. And, we kind of drive the relationship that way with the people. But one of the other things I would say is really important, Philip, is behavior.
Yeah.
And, we pride ourselves in Jabil and certainly procurement supply chain. We're talking to suppliers about how we behave and how we're going to talk to people. We're going to treat people with respect. And, we basically created this behavioral guideline. It was called our 4 C's strategy. And it's all around communication, collaboration, credibility, and consistency. So, whenever we're talking to a supplier, we've got those 4 C's in mind. We're not coming up with some nonsense story that, is just a complete fabrication and, that catches it out at some point in the future. We're very transparent. We're very honest, and, we do things properly. We escalate, according to, levels. We're not just allowing buyers to escalate directly to a CEO. That you can imagine, what a lot of the leadership teams within suppliers were dealing with between 22 and 24. It was just,
I smile knowing what we did in automotive. This was, a long time ago now, is 15, 20 years ago, but there wasn't necessarily that sense of ethics, and it was a zero-sum game between you and your suppliers, where there was a winner and a loser, and there was no trust between any parties, and that meant that anything was fair game to get what you wanted. And that was one of the things that probably pushed me out of the industry. But the fact that you're taking those principles and building that into your way of being, essentially, I think is a really powerful thing, because it protects you against one of the things about supply relation management programs that's always a risk is that it's great when business is going great, and then when you need a little bit more and need to save a little bit more money, everything that you talked about goes out the window, because you're just sending letters saying you need 10% cost reduction. And then the next time you go back to the well again and want to build relationships, you've just destroyed all of that trust.
100%. And to be honest, that's why that team has nothing to do with price negotiations, shortages, anything like that, and it's why we try and keep them out of the 90 to 365 day timeline, because that's exactly what that is, right? We need parts and we need competitive pricing to enable our customers to be competitive in the market. So without that, we're nothing as a manufacturing company, as far as the supply chain offering that we have for those customers. But on the supplier side and supplier relationship management side, they are truly focused on, how do we do things in the future, and how are we going to move forward together? And, so it still exists, that desire to have the competitive cost, and, that desire to have your unfair share of parts. But that lies with our commodity management team. That SRM team is, as you say, somewhat devoid from the day-to-day activities, which allows them to have these kind of higher level conversations. And, it keeps that consistency and credibility, so that when, we do need something, we are asking for something in the short term, we can do that, because we're not banging on the table with those rules.
And it's from a genuine place, as opposed to you're just, trying to get what you can from your suppliers because you need to free up a little bit more cash.
A little bit more
exactly.
Out.
Well, Graham, it's been a pleasure to chat today on all things semiconductors. I really appreciate both your time and your insights. It's it's an interesting market that's obviously really evolving. If I leave with what's something that you're watching right now in the market that is something of particular interest over the next 3 or 6 months, and perhaps not tariffs, as we're all kind of watching tariffs. If I take that one away from you, is there anything else that you kind of just keeping an eye on to see how it develops?
I guess it's more on the on the supply side, and looking at what's happening with capacity utilization, book-to-bill levels, and inventory. The inventory being so low, book-to-bill levels being pretty high, or certainly above 1, and capacity utilization being low. We're watching that very carefully, because it's not going to take much to push us back into the a kind of, I don't want to say allocated, because that would be a bit extreme, but certainly a shortage market where demand would be exceeding supply. It just wouldn't take much. So we pulse the market every 90 days for new costs, new lead times, updates on what's going on in the market. But I think on a kind of weekly cadence, our guys are out there just kind of keeping an eye on what's going on. So it's probably on that side, Philip, just that looking at those 3 key indexes and making sure that we don't end up kind of caught without
no surprises.
That's the last thing you need in procurement. No surprises.
Well, Graham, I appreciate your time. And the very last question I always ask is, if anybody is interested in connecting, reaching out, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and certainly you can contact me through Jabil.com. There's ways through to do that.
All right. Well, we'll include links to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for today's episode. So those are going to be artofprocurement.com/podcast. Go to artofprocurement.com/podcast. You'll find this conversation between me and Graham. But one last time, Graham, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Philip.